The aging stagecoach rattled to a stop before the dusty main street of Promise Creek, Montana Territory. 1876, jolting Dorothea Keller from her fitful sleep. At 42, her journey west represented her last chance at a new beginning, though she couldn't help but feel that life's best opportunities had already passed her by. Dorothea wiped condensation from the window and peered out at Promise Creek. After burying her father and selling their failing millinery shop back in Philadelphia, she had answered her cousin Martha's invitation to help run the town's only hotel. The alternative becoming dependent on distant relatives who had made it clear she was an unwelcome burden was unthinkable. "End of the line, madam," the driver called, opening the door. Dorothea stepped down, her legs stiff from 3 days of travel. Her gray-streaked chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, and her once fine traveling dress was wrinkled beyond salvation. She tried to brush away the worst of the dust as the driver unloaded her 2 trunks. Dorothea, Martha Wilkins, 10 years her junior and as energetic as Dorothea remembered, rushed toward her. Despite the years that had passed since they'd last seen each other, Martha's embrace was warm and genuine. "You've arrived just in time," Martha said, linking arms with Dorothea. "The Silver Creek Hotel needs your steady hand. Ever since Howard passed, I've been drowning in ledgers and linens." Dorothea managed a smile. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Nonsense, I'm the grateful one," Martha insisted. "Now, where's that porter boy? He promised to fetch your luggage." "I can help with that." The deep voice startled both women. Turning, Dorothea found herself looking up at a tall man whose face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. When he tilted his head, she saw eyes the color of a summer sky, set in a sun-weathered face. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn leather vest, and despite the fine lines around his eyes suggesting he was no young man, there was something vital and strong in his bearing. "Kade Quinn," Martha exclaimed. "Perfect timing. My cousin's just arrived from Philadelphia." The man Kade touched the brim of his hat. "Madam," he lifted Dorothea's trunks as though they weighed nothing, one in each hand. "Where to?" "The hotel, if you please," Martha said. "Dorothea's taking the suite above the kitchen. It has its own entrance." As they walked, Martha filled the silence with news of the town who had married, who had moved on, the progress of the railroad that would soon connect Promise Creek to Helena. Dorothea barely heard her. She was too aware of the man walking behind them, carrying her belongings with an easy strength that made her feel suddenly acutely conscious of herself, her travel-worn appearance, her practical boots peeking from beneath her skirts, the gray in her hair that she'd stopped trying to hide. The Silver Creek Hotel stood 3 stories high, impressive for a town the size of Promise Creek. Inside, Martha showed Dorothea to her quarters, a sitting room with attached bedroom and a small private washroom, a luxury Dorothea hadn't expected. "I'll leave you to settle in," Martha said. "Dinner's at 6 in the hotel dining room, though I imagine you'd prefer a tray up here tonight." When Martha had gone, Kade set down the trunks and straightened. For a moment he stood in the doorway, seeming to fill it completely. "Welcome to Promise Creek, Miss Keller." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she replied formally, fishing in her reticule for a coin. "No need for that," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Martha's family." Dorothea lowered her hand, embarrassed. "You're very kind." His mouth curved in a smile that transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Not particularly, but I try to be useful." He touched his hat again. "If you need anything, my ranch is just north of town. Everyone knows where to find me." After he'd gone, Dorothea sank onto the edge of the bed. Her journey had left her bone tired, but it wasn't just fatigue she felt. There was a hollowness inside her, a space where hope had once lived. She had come west not because she believed life would be better here, but because she had nowhere else to go. She unpacked slowly, arranging her modest belongings in the wardrobe and dresser. Among them was a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, her mother's face alight with joy, her father standing proud beside her. They had married late, her mother 35, her father 40, and Dorothea had been their only child, born when her mother was nearly 38. A miracle, her mother had often called her, before consumption took her when Dorothea was just 16. Dorothea placed the picture carefully on the bedside table. She had never married, devoting her youth to caring for her father as rheumatism gradually bent his once straight back and gnarled his hands. By the time he passed, she had resigned herself to spinsterhood. At 42, she was long past the age when women expected romance or companionship. She washed her face and changed her dress, pinning her hair neatly at the nape of her neck. In the small mirror above the washstand, she studied herself critically. The woman who looked back had kind eyes and a generous mouth that still smiled easily, but also lines etched between her brows and at the corners of her eyes, and a softness beneath her jaw that hadn't been there in her 30s. "You'll do," she told her reflection, squaring her shoulders. This is no time for vanity. She was here to work, to make herself useful, to build whatever life was possible in the years left to her. That would have to be enough. At dinner, Martha introduced her to the hotel staff, a cook, 3 maids, a porter, and a handyman. Tomorrow, Martha explained, she would show Dorothea the books and begin teaching her the management of the place. "And what about Mr. Quinn?" Dorothea found herself asking as they shared tea after the meal. "Is he a frequent visitor to Promise Creek?" Martha smiled. "Kade. He comes to town once a week or so for supplies. He owns the Double Q Ranch about 5 miles north. It's one of the most successful operations in the territory. He seems capable." "That's one word for him," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "He's been a widower for going on 15 years now. Came west with his wife right after the war, but she died of fever the second year they were here. He raised their son alone, built that ranch from nothing." "He has a son," Martha corrected softly. "Kyle was killed in a stampede 3 years ago. He was 22, she sighed. Kade took it hard, as you'd expect, withdrew from everyone for a long while. It's only in the past year he started coming around again. Dorothea felt a pang of sympathy. To lose both wife and child, she couldn't imagine such grief. "Does he run the ranch himself now?" she asked. "He has hands, of course, but yes, he's very much involved in the day-to-day. That man can outwork men half his age." Martha poured more tea. "He's 47, if you're wondering." "I wasn't," Dorothea said quickly. Martha's smile widened. "Of course not. But he is considered quite a catch, despite being, how did my mother used to put it? Of a certain age. Several widows have set their caps for him, but he's shown no interest." "I'm hardly setting my cap for anyone," Dorothea said firmly. "I'm here to work, Martha, not to find a husband." "Who said anything about husbands?" Martha replied innocently. "I'm just giving you the lay of the land." The next morning, Dorothea rose early and dressed in a practical brown skirt and cream blouse. Martha was already in the hotel office, a small room behind the front desk, surrounded by ledgers and papers. "I hope you're good with numbers," Martha said by way of greeting. "Because I confess I'm not." Dorothea had always had a head for figures. While her father had managed the business aspects of their millinery shop, she had often assisted with the books and found she enjoyed the orderly progression of columns and sums. Now, as she examined the hotel ledgers, she saw immediately that Martha had been keeping records haphazardly at best. "I think I can make sense of this," she said, already mentally organizing how she would restructure the accounts. They spent the morning going through the hotel's operations, which rooms were occupied, which needed repairs, how the linens were managed, where supplies were ordered from. By noon, Dorothea's head was swimming with information, but she felt a growing confidence. This work she could do. After a simple lunch, Martha insisted on showing her around Promise Creek. The town was larger than Dorothea had first thought, boasting a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a small church, a schoolhouse, a blacksmith, and various other establishments. People nodded and greeted Martha warmly as they passed, eyeing Dorothea with undisguised curiosity. "That's Dr. Harrington's office, Martha said, pointing to a neat white building. He came out west for his health 10 years ago, some lung trouble that the mountain air seems to have cured. He's a good doctor, though getting on in years. The town council is trying to persuade a younger physician to join him. They turned down another street, and Martha continued her guided tour. And that's oh, look who's here. Dorothea followed her cousin's gaze and saw Kade Quinn emerging from the general store, his arms full of packages. Today he wore a blue shirt that matched his eyes, tucked into dark trousers. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing thick hair the color of wheat with threads of silver at the temples. He spotted them and walked over, his stride long and easy. "Ladies," he greeted, touching his hat. "Settling in, Miss Keller?" "Yes, thank you," Dorothea replied. She was determined to be composed in his presence, even as she noticed the way the sun caught in his hair and the lines that bracketed his mouth when he smiled. "Martha has been showing me around town. You picked a fine day for it," he said, glancing at the clear sky. "Though we could use some rain soon, the creek's running lower than I'd like." "Kade's something of an expert on the weather," Martha explained. "His predictions are more reliable than the almanac," he shrugged modestly. "When your livelihood depends on it, you pay attention." A young woman emerged from the store behind him, carrying more packages. She was perhaps 20, with copper-colored hair and a pretty, freckled face. "There you are, Uncle Kade," she said. "I've got the coffee and sugar." "Miss Keller, this is my niece, Eliza Quinn," Kade introduced. "She's staying with me for a spell while her parents are back east seeing to her grandmother." Eliza bobbed a quick curtsy. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Eliza, you must convince your uncle to bring you to the hotel's Saturday night supper this week," Martha said. "We're having a small musical evening afterward. Several townspeople have promised to perform." Eliza's face lit up. "Oh, could we, Uncle Kade? I've been practicing my piano pieces." Kade looked uncomfortable. "We'll see. There's a lot of work at the ranch just now." "All the more reason to take an evening off," Martha persisted. "It's been ages since we've heard Eliza play, and I know you enjoy music." "Please," Eliza added, looking up at him with such hopeful eyes that Dorothea couldn't imagine anyone refusing her. Kade sighed, but there was a fondness in it. "All right, Saturday then." "Wonderful," Martha clapped her hands. "Dorothea, you'll help me plan the menu, won't you?" Before Dorothea could answer, the town sheriff approached, his expression serious. "Kade, got a minute, of course." Kade handed his packages to Eliza. "Ladies, if you'll excuse me." As he walked away with the sheriff, Eliza turned to Martha and Dorothea. "Is something wrong?" "Probably just ranch business," Martha reassured her. "Your uncle often helps Sheriff Davis with matters requiring discretion." They continued their tour, but Dorothea found her thoughts returning to Kade Quinn. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength, a depth of character that intrigued her despite her best intentions. That evening, after dinner, she sat at the small desk in her sitting room and began organizing the hotel's accounts. The work was soothing, requiring just enough concentration to keep her mind from wandering to tall ranchers with kind eyes and weather-lined faces. The week passed in a flurry of activity as Dorothea familiarized herself with the hotel's operations. She discovered that Martha had been struggling more than she'd let on. The books were in disarray, several rooms needed repairs, and the staff, while loyal, had grown lax without proper supervision. With tact and firmness, Dorothea began making changes. She instituted a new system for tracking occupancy, scheduled repairs, and gently reminded the staff of standards that had slipped. To her relief, they responded well, seeming grateful for clear direction. By Saturday, she felt she had made progress, though there was still much to do. The special supper that evening would be her first real test as Martha's partner in managing the hotel. She dressed with care in her best gown, a deep plum silk that she had remade twice over the years, but which still flattered her figure and brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Her hair she arranged simply but neatly, with tortoiseshell combs holding it in place. Martha burst into her room without knocking, already dressed in royal blue, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You look lovely," she exclaimed, circling Dorothea. "That color suits you perfectly." "It's rather fine for Promise Creek, isn't it?" Dorothea worried, smoothing the skirt. "Nonsense. This is a special occasion. Besides, we want to show these Westerners that we Easterners know how to dress for an evening." Martha winked. "Come along, the guests will begin arriving soon and I need your help greeting them." The hotel dining room had been transformed. White cloths covered the tables, which were adorned with wildflowers in simple glass vases. Candles in polished holders cast a warm glow over the scene, and the hotel's finest china and silver had been brought out. The evening was to begin with supper, followed by coffee and dessert in the adjoining parlor, where several townspeople would provide musical entertainment. Martha had arranged for the church's piano to be moved to the hotel for the occasion, and chairs had been set up in rows. Guests began to arrive: the banker and his wife, the schoolteacher, the mayor and his family, Dr. Harrington, and other prominent citizens of Promise Creek. Dorothea stood beside Martha, smiling and shaking hands, trying to commit names and faces to memory. And then Kade Quinn was there, looking transformed in a well-cut dark suit and crisp white shirt. He had tamed his hair and trimmed his beard, and there was something almost shy in his manner as he greeted them. "Miss Keller," he said, taking her hand briefly, "you look very fine this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she replied, willing herself not to blush like a schoolgirl. "As do you." Eliza stood beside him, radiant in a green dress that set off her auburn hair. She clutched a portfolio of sheet music, her excitement palpable. "I'm so nervous," she confided to Dorothea as they moved toward their assigned table. "I haven't played for an audience since school." "I'm sure you'll be wonderful," Dorothea assured her, touched by the girl's openness. Kade had been seated at their table along with Dr. Harrington and the schoolteacher, Miss Winters. Throughout the meal, Dorothea was aware of Kade's presence across from her, the deep timbre of his voice, as he discussed cattle prices with the doctor, the way he listened attentively when Miss Winters spoke about her students, the gentle encouragement he offered Eliza when she fretted about her upcoming performance. After supper, they moved to the parlor. Eliza was to play second, following the mayor's wife, who sang a somewhat pitchy rendition of Beautiful Dreamer accompanied by her daughter on the violin. When it was Eliza's turn, she approached the piano with visible trepidation. She arranged her music, took a deep breath, and began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Her fingers moved with surprising skill over the keys, drawing forth music that filled the room with a poignant beauty. Dorothea glanced at Kade and saw that his eyes were fixed on his niece, a mixture of pride and something like pain in his expression. She remembered suddenly what Martha had told her about his son, the boy who would have been about Eliza's age had he lived. When Eliza finished, the applause was enthusiastic. She curtsied, blushing with pleasure, and returned to her seat beside her uncle, who squeezed her hand wordlessly. Other performances followed: recitations, songs, a lively fiddle tune that had everyone's feet tapping. The evening was drawing to a close when Martha suddenly announced, "And now my cousin Dorothea Keller will favor us with a song." Dorothea stared at Martha in horror. "I will do no such thing," she hissed. "Of course you will," Martha said cheerfully. "I remember how beautifully you sang at Aunt Mildred's wedding. The whole family talked about it for months." That was 20 years ago, but Martha was already leading her to the front of the room, whispering to the accompanist, who nodded and positioned his fingers over the keys. The opening notes of "Drink to Me Only with Thine Eyes" filled the room, and Dorothea knew she had no choice. Taking a steadying breath, she began to sing. Her voice was not as clear or strong as it had been in her youth, but there was a richness to it now, a depth of feeling that came from years of living and observing life's joys and sorrows. She sang without artifice, the simple, beautiful melody flowing from her as naturally as breath. When she finished, There was a moment of silence before the applause began. Martha was beaming, and even Dorothea had to admit it felt good to sing again after so long. As she returned to her seat, she caught Kade's eye. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read: surprise, certainly, but also something more intense, almost reverent. "That was beautiful, Miss Keller," he said quietly when she sat down. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "It's been a long time since I've sung for anyone but myself." "A shame," he said. "A voice like that shouldn't be kept hidden." The evening ended soon after. As guests began to depart, Kade and Eliza approached Dorothea and Martha. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Eliza said, her eyes bright. "I haven't enjoyed myself so much in ages." "You played wonderfully," Dorothea told her sincerely. "You have a real gift." "Uncle Kade made sure I had lessons even out here," Eliza explained. "He says music civilizes the soul." Kade looked embarrassed. "I said something like that, I suppose." "Well, it's true," Martha declared. "And speaking of civilization, Kade Quinn, when are you going to show Dorothea your ranch? She's been here a week already and hasn't seen anything beyond the town limits." Dorothea opened her mouth to protest, but Kade spoke first. "I'd be happy to if Miss Keller is interested." He turned to her. "The double Q isn't grand, but it's pretty country, especially now with the spring flowers blooming in the meadows." Put on the spot, Dorothea couldn't think of a graceful way to refuse. Besides, she was curious about his home, this place he had built from nothing. "That would be very nice, thank you." "Excellent," Martha said before either of them could reconsider. "Tomorrow's Sunday, perfect timing. Kade can collect you after church." And so it was decided. The next morning, Dorothea dressed for church in a blue cotton dress with a small bustle, modest but presentable. The service was held in Promise Creek's simple white church, where most of the town gathered weekly. Dorothea sat with Martha, conscious of Kade and Eliza a few pews ahead. Once, during a hymn, Kade glanced back, caught her eye, and smiled briefly before turning around again. That small gesture shouldn't have affected her, but Dorothea found herself flustered, losing her place in the hymnal. After the service, as people mingled outside in the spring sunshine, Kade approached her. He had exchanged his Sunday best for more practical attire, clean but suited for ranch work. "If you're still willing, Miss Keller, I thought we might ride out to the ranch. I've brought the buggy." He gestured to a well-maintained two-seater parked nearby. "Eliza's staying in town to dine with friends, so it would just be the two of us." "If that's proper enough," he added, a hint of uncertainty crossing his features. Martha, overhearing, answered for Dorothea, "Of course it's proper. You're hardly youngsters sneaking off unchaperoned." She waved a dismissive hand. "Go, enjoy the afternoon. I don't expect you back until supper time, Dorothea." Kade helped Dorothea into the buggy, his hand strong and steady beneath her elbow. As they set off, Dorothea was acutely aware of his proximity, the sleeve of his shirt occasionally brushing against her arm as he handled the reins. "I hope Martha didn't push you into this," he said after they had left the town behind. "She can be forceful when she has an idea in her head." "She means well," Dorothea replied diplomatically. "That she does." Kade smiled. "She's been trying to draw me back into society since, well, for some time now." "Since your son died," Dorothea said softly. When he glanced at her in surprise, she added, "Martha told me." "I'm very sorry for your loss." His hands tightened on the reins momentarily. "Thank you. It's been 3 years, but some days it feels like yesterday." He was quiet for a moment. "Other days, I can remember the good times without the pain overshadowing everything." "Those days are coming more frequently now. Time doesn't heal all wounds, as they say, but it does teach us how to live with them," Dorothea observed. Kade looked at her thoughtfully. "You sound like you speak from experience." "Nothing as profound as losing a child," she said quickly. "But yes, I've had my share of disappointments." "Would you tell me about yourself, Miss Keller, about your life before Promise Creek?" It had been a long time since anyone had asked Dorothea about herself with genuine interest. As the buggy rolled through the Montana landscape, She found herself telling Kade about her childhood in Philadelphia, about losing her mother young, about the years spent caring for her father while their millinery business slowly failed. "I was engaged once," she admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "When I was 22, his name was Edward Pembroke. He was a lawyer with prospects. What happened? My father's health began to fail. I was needed at home. Edward wasn't willing to wait or to take on the responsibility of an invalid father-in-law." She smoothed her skirt. "He married the daughter of my father's competitor 6 months later. His loss," Kade said simply. Dorothea laughed softly. "That's kind of you to say, but it was a long time ago. I made my peace with it, and with the fact that some women are meant for marriage and motherhood while others have different paths." Kade didn't respond immediately, his eyes on the horizon. Finally, he said, "I think sometimes life takes unexpected turns and we find ourselves on paths we never imagined. That doesn't mean they're the wrong ones." Before Dorothea could reply, he pointed ahead. "There it is, the double Q." The ranch spread before them, a large main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, several outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, pastures where cattle grazed. Everything was well maintained, the buildings freshly painted, the fences solid. "It's impressive," Dorothea said honestly. "You've built something substantial here." "It's been my life's work," Kade acknowledged. "After Sarah, my wife, died, I poured everything into making this place succeed for Kyle's sake, after he was gone." He trailed off, then continued more firmly, "Well, the work was still here whether I had someone to leave it to or not." He drove the buggy up to the house and helped Dorothea down. "Would you like to see inside? My housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, always prepares Sunday dinner. There'll be plenty if you're hungry." The main house was surprisingly comfortable. The large central room had a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture upholstered in warm colors, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes, and windows that let in abundant light. It was undeniably masculine but not austere. There were touches that softened it: a quilt thrown over a chair, wildflowers in a blue pottery vase, a painting of mountain scenery above the mantel. "Sarah was an artist," Kade explained, following Dorothea's gaze to the painting. "She did that our first summer here before she fell ill. She was talented," Dorothea said. "She captured the light beautifully." Mrs. Finch, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair, emerged from the kitchen. "Mr. Quinn, you're just in time." "The roast is—" She stopped short at the sight of Dorothea. "Oh, I didn't realize we had company." "Mrs. Finch, this is Miss Dorothea Keller, Martha Wilkins's cousin from Philadelphia. She's helping Martha manage the hotel. Miss Keller, Mrs. Finch, the backbone of the double Q, Mrs." Finch wiped her hands on her apron and nodded politely. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Keller. I'll set another place at the table." The dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and spring greens from Mrs. Finch's garden. Dorothea found herself relaxing as they ate, the initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable conversation. After the meal, Kade suggested a tour of the ranch. "If you're not too tired," he added, "the view from the north pasture is worth the ride." "I'd like that," Dorothea said, realizing she was in no hurry to return to town. Kade saddled 2 horses, a steady bay mare for Dorothea and a muscular chestnut gelding for himself. "Do you ride, Miss Keller?" "It's been many years," she admitted. "We kept a horse and trap in Philadelphia, but I haven't been on horseback since I was a girl." "Daisy here is gentle as they come," Kade assured her, helping her mount. "Just hold the reins lightly and let her follow my lead." They rode at an easy pace, Kade pointing out features of the ranch: the creek that provided water, the hay fields that would be cut in late summer, the different pastures where cattle grazed according to the season. He spoke knowledgeably about his operation, and Dorothea could see the pride he took in what he had built. The north pasture, as promised, offered a spectacular view. They dismounted at the crest of a gentle hill, and Dorothea caught her breath at the sight before her rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains. their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring warmth in the valley. "It's magnificent," she said softly. Kade stood beside her, his hat in his hands. "This is what I saw when I first came here right after the war, just open land full of possibility." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "Sarah thought I was crazy, giving up a secure position in St. Louis to chase a dream in Montana territory. But she believed in me enough to come along. She must have loved you very much." "She did," he acknowledged. "We had a good marriage, if too short. I was blessed to have found her." He paused. "But I've been alone a long time now." There was something in his voice that made Dorothea glance up at him. He was looking at her with an intensity that sent a flutter through her chest. "Mr. Quinn, Kade," he corrected gently. "Please." "Kade," she repeated, the name feeling strange and intimate on her lips. "I think perhaps we should start back. It's getting late." He nodded, not pressing whatever had been on his mind, and helped her back onto her horse. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. Dorothea found herself thinking how unexpectedly pleasant the day had been, how long it had been since she had simply enjoyed a beautiful place in the company of someone who seemed to value her presence. As they approached the ranch house, Kade spoke again. "I hope you'll come back, Miss Keller. Perhaps next Sunday. I could show you the western part of the ranch. There's a small lake there where we sometimes picnic." Dorothea hesitated. She was starting to recognize the dangerous territory they were entering, at least for her. Kade Quinn was kind, intelligent, and attractive, the sort of man who might have turned her head 20 years ago. But she was 42 now, with gray in her hair and the best years of her life behind her. Whatever interest he showed in her was surely just politeness, or perhaps loneliness. "I'm not sure that would be wise," she said carefully. Kade reined his horse to a stop, and Dorothea did the same. "May I ask why not?" She met his gaze directly. "Mr. Quinn, Kade, you've been very kind, and I've enjoyed today immensely. But I think perhaps you're lonely and I'm new in town, and it would be easy for both of us to mistake companionship for something it isn't." "And what if it isn't a mistake?" he asked quietly. Dorothea shook her head. "I'm 42 years old. I'm not looking for romantic complications." "I'm 47, he countered. "I know my own mind, Dorothea, and I find myself drawn to you in a way I haven't felt in a very long time." His words sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the sunshine, but doubt followed quickly. "You hardly know me." "I'd like the chance to change that." His expression was earnest, with none of the practiced charm of a man accustomed to wooing women. "I'm not asking for promises, Dorothea, just the opportunity to spend more time with you." Put that way, it was hard to refuse. And if she were honest with herself, she wanted to see him again, to explore this unexpected connection between them. "All right," she said finally. "Next Sunday." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. They returned to the ranch house where Mrs. Finch had prepared a basket for Dorothea to take back to Martha: fresh bread, preserves, and some early spring vegetables from her kitchen garden. As they drove back to town in the buggy, the conversation flowed more easily, touching on books they had both read, experiences they had shared despite the different paths their lives had taken. When they reached the hotel, Kade helped Dorothea down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," he said. "I haven't enjoyed an afternoon so much in years." "Nor have I," she admitted. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. "Until next Sunday, then." "Until then," Dorothea agreed, aware of Martha watching from the hotel window, no doubt with keen interest. The week that followed was busy. Dorothea threw herself into her work at the hotel, implementing the changes she had planned and beginning to see results. The accounts were now properly organized, the staff was responding to her guidance, and guests were noticing the improved service and cleanliness. Martha, meanwhile, was insufferably pleased with herself. "I knew you and Kade would get along," she said repeatedly. "He needs someone sensible in his life, and you need someone to remind you that you're more than just a capable manager." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Dorothea warned. We spent one afternoon together. We're hardly planning a future." But despite her words, Dorothea found herself thinking of Kade off in his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how carefully he had listened to her. By the time Sunday arrived, she had changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a sage green dress that Martha assured her brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Kade arrived promptly after church, this time with a proper picnic hamper strapped to the buggy. "Mrs. Finch insisted," he explained as he helped Dorothea up. "She said my idea of a picnic would be jerky and hardtack." Dorothea laughed. "She seems to know you well." "Too well, sometimes," he admitted with a rueful smile. The day was even more pleasant than their first outing. Kade took her to the small lake he had mentioned, a clear blue expanse nestled between low hills. They spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree and unpacked Mrs. Finch's generous provisions: cold chicken, fresh bread, pickles, apple tarts, and a bottle of lemonade. As they ate, they talked more freely than before. Kade told her about his childhood in Missouri, his service in the Union Army during the war, his decision to come west afterwards seeking a fresh start. Dorothea shared stories of her school days, her dreams of travel that had never materialized, the small pleasures and disappointments that had shaped her life. "I always thought I'd have children," she confessed as they walked along the lakeshore after eating. "Even after Edward left and the years began to pass, I held onto that hope longer than was reasonable." Kade was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret the path your life took?" Dorothea considered the question seriously. "Not exactly regret. I made the choices I thought were right at the time. I couldn't have abandoned my father." She picked up a smooth stone and skimmed it across the water. "But I do wonder sometimes what might have been if circumstances had been different." "I understand that," Kade said. "After Kyle died, I spent a lot of time wondering if I could have done things differently. If I had insisted he stay at the house that day instead of riding out with the men, if I had been the one to lead the drive instead of him." He shook his head. "It can drive a person mad, that kind of thinking." "How did you stop?" Dorothea asked gently. "I'm not sure I have entirely, but I try to remember that Kyle lived the life he wanted. He loved this land as much as I do. He died doing work that mattered to him." Kade's voice grew husky with emotion. "And I try to honor his memory by living fully, not just existing." Impulsively, Dorothea reached out and took his hand. Kade's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. They stood that way for a long moment, watching the sunlight play on the water, before continuing their walk hand in hand. When it was time to return to Promise Creek, Dorothea found herself reluctant to leave. The afternoon had created a bubble of intimacy between them, a shared space where age and past disappointments seemed less important than the connection they were forming. As they drove back, Kade asked, "Would you consider coming to dinner at the ranch next Saturday? Mrs. Finch makes an excellent pot roast and Eliza will be back from her visit by then. She's been asking when she might see you again." "I'd like that," Dorothea replied. "Good," he smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that had become dear to her. "And perhaps you might call me Kade more often. I like the way it sounds when you say it." Dorothea felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "I'd like that too, Kade." The following Saturday, Martha helped Dorothea dress for dinner at the Double Q, fussing with her hair and insisting she borrow a pair of pearl earrings. "This is just a casual dinner, Martha, not a society ball," Dorothea protested. "There's nothing just about it," Martha replied, securing the second earring. "Kade Quinn hasn't invited a woman to dinner at his ranch in the 15 years I've known him. This is significant, Dorothea." "You're reading too much into it," Dorothea insisted, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "Eliza will be there. It's hardly a romantic assignation." Was all Martha said, but her knowing smile spoke volumes. Kade arrived to collect Dorothea in his buggy, dressed in clean, pressed clothing that still managed to look natural on him, not stiff or formal. His smile when he saw her made Dorothea glad of Martha's fussing after all. "You look beautiful," he said simply. At the ranch, Eliza greeted Dorothea with enthusiasm, showing her the piano in the corner of the main room, a smaller instrument than the one at the hotel, but well-maintained. "Uncle Kade had it brought all the way from Denver," she explained proudly. "He said the house needed music." "It's lovely," Dorothea said, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "Perhaps you'll sing for us after dinner," Kade suggested, coming to stand beside her. "If it's not imposing, I'd be happy to." Dinner was as delicious as promised: tender pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, and an apple pie for dessert. Mrs. Finch joined them at the table, her initial reserve toward Dorothea warming as the meal progressed. Afterward, at Eliza's urging, Dorothea sang while the girl accompanied her on the piano. They performed several songs, ending with "Beautiful Dreamer," which Eliza played with more skill than the mayor's wife had sung it at the hotel's musical evening. When the music ended, Mrs. Finch excused herself to the kitchen, and Eliza, after a meaningful look from her uncle, suddenly remembered correspondence she needed to complete before bed. Left alone with Kade in the main room, Dorothea felt a flutter of nervousness. He poured them each a small glass of sherry and joined her on the settee before the fireplace, where a small fire warded off the evening chill. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "Having you here, it makes the house feel more like a home than it has in a long time." "I've enjoyed it very much," Dorothea replied honestly. "Your family is lovely," Kade smiled. "They seem quite taken with you as well." He set his glass down and turned to face her more directly. "Dorothea, there's something I want to say to you if you'll hear me out." Her heart quickened. "Of course. When Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I focused on raising Kyle, on building the ranch after Kyle was gone." He paused, his expression somber. "Well, for a while I wasn't sure there was much point to anything, but gradually I started to find my way back. To remember that there might still be purpose, even joy, left for me." He took her hand. "And then you arrived in Promise Creek, and from that first moment, something changed. I found myself looking forward to seeing you, thinking about you when we were apart." "It's been a long time since I've felt this way about anyone, Dorothea." She looked down at their joined hands, her throat tight with emotion. "Kade, I've felt it too, but I'm afraid." "Of what?" he asked gently. "Of misunderstanding what this is, of wanting too much." She met his gaze, determined to be honest. "I'm 42 years old. The time when I might have expected romance, marriage, a family of my own, that's past. I came to Promise Creek to build a quiet life, to be useful, not to have my heart turned upside down by a handsome rancher." His eyes warmed at her words. "Do I turn your heart upside down?" Despite herself, Dorothea smiled. "You know you do, or you wouldn't look so pleased." Kade laughed softly, then grew serious again. "Dorothea, age is just a number. You talk as though your life is mostly behind you, but from where I stand, you're a vibrant, beautiful woman with decades ahead of you. Decades that could be filled with all the things you thought you'd missed: love, companionship, family." "Family," she repeated, her voice catching. "Kade, I'm too old to have children now." "Family isn't just about bearing children," he said firmly. "It's about creating a home, about loving and being loved. Eliza adores you already, and there are children in this territory who need homes, orphans, children whose parents can't care for them." The possibility he was painting a life with him, a home, a family pieced together from broken parts, made whole again, was almost too much to hope for. "You make it sound so simple." "Not simple," he corrected. "Worth fighting for." Kade lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Dorothea, just that you'll consider the possibility of us, of a future together. Take all the time you need." Looking into his clear blue eyes, Dorothea felt something shift within her, a wall beginning to crumble, a heart long guarded starting to open. "I will," she promised. When he drove her back to the hotel that night, Kade walked her to the private entrance of her quarters. In the moonlight, he looked down at her with such tenderness that Dorothea felt her breath catch. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Instead, Dorothea lifted her face to his. His kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, she felt light-headed, as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "Good night, Dorothea," he said softly. "Good night, Kade." Inside her rooms, Dorothea touched her lips, still warm from his kiss. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with love, with joy, with possibilities she had long ago surrendered. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Dorothea's life. Kade called on her regularly, taking her for drives, inviting her to the ranch, escorting her to church and town events. They were the subject of considerable interest in Promise Creek, but Dorothea found she didn't mind the gentle teasing from Martha or the knowing looks from townspeople. She grew closer to Eliza as well, finding in the girl a kindred spirit with her love of music and literature. Sometimes Dorothea would visit the ranch while Kade was busy with ranch work, spending afternoons with Eliza, teaching her to bake the specialties Dorothea's mother had passed down, or simply talking about books and ideas. Even Mrs. Finch had warmed to her, grudgingly at first, then with increasing approval as she saw how Dorothea brought life back to the ranch house and to its owner. "Never thought I'd see Mr. Quinn smile so much again," she confided to Dorothea one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. "Does my heart good to see it?" Yet despite the joy of these weeks, Dorothea still held back from fully committing to the future Kade had suggested. Some small, stubborn part of her continued to doubt not his feelings, but the wisdom of building a life together at their ages with their histories. One evening in late May, Kade invited Dorothea for a special dinner at the ranch. When she arrived, she found the house transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, flowers filled vases throughout the main room, and the table was set with fine china and silver. "What's the occasion?" she asked, touched by the effort. "Do I need an occasion to want everything to be perfect for you?" Kade replied, taking her wrap. Mrs. Finch had outdone herself with dinner: roast duck, new potatoes with herbs, fresh asparagus, and for dessert, a delicate lemon cake that Dorothea had once mentioned was her favorite. Eliza ate with them but excused herself immediately after dessert, claiming she had promised to help Mrs. Finch with something in the kitchen. When they were alone, Kade reached across the table and took Dorothea's hand. "I have something for you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Opening it, he revealed a ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds in a delicate gold setting. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother gave it to me before she died, saying I should save it for someone special." Dorothea stared at the ring, her heart pounding. "Kade." "I love you, Dorothea," he said simply. "These past weeks have been the happiest I've known in years. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building something beautiful together." His eyes held hers, earnest and hopeful. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, Dorothea couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. Then all the doubts that had been simmering beneath the surface rushed forth. "Kade, I'm too old," she said, her voice breaking. "Too old to be starting over, too old to be a proper wife to you. Too old." He repeated, genuinely perplexed. "Dorothea, you're vibrant and beautiful and full of life. How could you possibly be too old?" "I'm 42, she said, as though that explained everything. "The best years of my life are behind me." "You deserve someone younger, someone who could give you children, who has her whole life ahead of her." Kade's expression softened with understanding. He rose from his chair and came to kneel beside her, still holding her hand. "Dorothea, listen to me. I've had a young wife. I've raised a child. I've lived that life, and it was precious to me. But that chapter is closed." He squeezed her hand gently. "What I want now, what I need, is a partner, a companion who understands what it means to have lived, to have known joy and sorrow, and to value each day as the gift it is. I want you, Dorothea, exactly as you are. Your age isn't a disadvantage, it's part of what makes you the woman I've fallen in love with." Tears filled Dorothea's eyes. "But what if? What if you change your mind? What if, years from now, you regret choosing someone who was already past her prime when you met her?" "Past her prime." Kade shook his head firmly. "Dorothea Keller, you've been worth waiting for. All those years I spent alone, all the time you spent wondering if love had passed you by, it was leading us to this moment, to each other." He lifted the ring from its box. "I don't know how many years we have ahead of us, no one does, but I know I want to spend every one of them with you. Will you marry me, Dorothea? Will you make a life with me, however many seasons were granted?" Looking into his eyes, Dorothea saw nothing but sincerity, nothing but love. And suddenly, the fears that had seemed so insurmountable moments before began to recede. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Kade, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Kade rose and drew her to her feet, into his arms, and kissed her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. From the kitchen doorway came the sound of delighted clapping. Dorothea looked over to see Eliza and Mrs. Finch watching them, both women beaming. "I knew you'd say yes." Eliza exclaimed, rushing forward to hug Dorothea. "I just knew it." Mrs. Finch wiped her eyes suspiciously with her apron. "About time this house had a proper mistress again," she said gruffly, but her smile was genuine. "Congratulations to you both." That night, as Kade drove Dorothea back to the hotel, she couldn't stop looking at the ring on her finger, at the way it caught the moonlight. "I still can hardly believe it," she admitted. "That this is happening at this stage of my life." Kade's arm tightened around her waist. "Believe it," he said. "You deserve every happiness, Dorothea, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." At the hotel, Martha was waiting up despite the late hour. Her squeal of delight when she saw the ring could probably be heard all the way to the saloon. "I knew it," she crowed, hugging Dorothea fiercely. "Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say Kade Quinn was smitten from the first moment he laid eyes on you?" "Yes, yes, you're very wise and all-knowing," Dorothea laughed, too happy to be embarrassed by Martha's exuberance. "When's the wedding?" Martha demanded. "Oh, we must start planning immediately. The hotel can host the reception, of course, and you'll need a dress perhaps we can send to Helena for fabric." "Martha, we only just got engaged tonight," Dorothea protested. "We haven't discussed any details yet." But Kade, to her surprise, had an answer ready. "I was thinking June," he said. "Mid-June, when the wildflowers are at their peak. We could have the ceremony at the ranch if Dorothea agrees." "June," Dorothea repeated, "but that's only 3 weeks away. Too soon?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "We can wait longer if you prefer." Dorothea considered. At her age, with their circumstances, what was the point in a long engagement? They knew their minds and hearts, and there was something appealing about a June wedding surrounded by Montana's wild beauty. "No," she decided, "June is perfect." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Promise Creek, met with general approval and a fair amount of good-natured teasing directed at Kade for finally being lassoed. Dorothea ordered fabric from Helena for a wedding dress, not white, which would have seemed absurd at her age, but a soft, shimmering ivory silk that Martha assured her was perfect. The local seamstress worked diligently to create a gown that was elegant but not overly youthful, with a modest bustle and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Meanwhile, Kade was busy with his own preparations. The master bedroom at the ranch, unused since Sarah's death, was opened, aired, and refurnished. He consulted Dorothea about colors and fabrics, determined that their home should reflect both of them. Eliza threw herself into the wedding plans with enthusiasm, insisting on being responsible for the flowers and helping Mrs. Finch plan the wedding feast. Even the weather cooperated, with clear skies and mild temperatures predicted for their chosen date. The night before the wedding, Dorothea sat with Martha in her quarters at the hotel, too excited to sleep. "Are you nervous?" Martha asked, pouring them each a small glass of sherry. A little, Dorothea admitted. Not about marrying Kade, I've never been more certain of anything, but about everything else. Being a rancher's wife, being a stepmother to Eliza, even if only for the short time before she's grown and gone, making a new home. You'll be wonderful at all of it, Martha assured her. I've seen how you are with Eliza, she adores you. And as for being a rancher's wife, well, you've been managing this hotel like a general commanding troops. The double Q won't know what hit it, Dorothea laughed. I don't think Kade expects me to reorganize his ranch. Maybe not, but he'll be better for having your practical mind helping him. Martha sipped her sherry. And you'll be better for having someone who looks at you like you hung the moon. Lord knows you deserve it, after all those years taking care of your father. I don't regret those years, Dorothea said softly. They shaped me into the person I am now, the person Kade loves. Well, he certainly does love you, Martha agreed. Anyone with eyes can see that. The way that man watches you when you're not looking, it's enough to make an old maid like me believe in romance again. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, just as promised. Dorothea dressed with Martha's help, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the pearl earrings Martha had insisted she wear borrowed for luck. The ivory gown was everything she had hoped for: elegant, flattering, appropriate for a bride of her age, yet undeniably romantic. Her hair was arranged simply but beautifully, with small white flowers tucked into the coils at the back of her head. You look radiant, Martha told her, tears in her eyes. Absolutely radiant. A buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers arrived to collect them, driven by the hotel's porter. The ride to the double Q seemed both endless and over too quickly. When they arrived, Dorothea was amazed to see how the ranch had been transformed. The ceremony was to take place in the meadow north of the house, where wildflowers created a natural carpet of color. Chairs had been arranged in rows, already filled with townspeople and neighboring ranchers. At the front, beneath an arch twined with more flowers, the minister waited. And beside him stood Kade, so handsome in his new suit that Dorothea's heart skipped a beat. Eliza had arranged for a violinist from Helena to play as Dorothea walked down the aisle, her hand on the arm of Dr. Harrington, who had graciously agreed to give her away. The music swelled, heads turned, and Dorothea began the short walk toward her future. Kade's face as he watched her approach was a study in emotions: wonder, joy, love, all mingled together in an expression so tender it brought tears to Dorothea's eyes. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, he whispered, "You take my breath away." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, promises to cherish and support each other through whatever life brought their way. When Kade slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his voice rough with emotion. "With this ring I thee wed," he said. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days we are granted. You may kiss your bride," the minister announced when the vows were complete. Kade gathered Dorothea gently in his arms and kissed her with such reverence that several women in the audience audibly sighed. When they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, the applause was enthusiastic and genuine. The celebration that followed was everything a Western wedding should be: abundant food, music, dancing, and laughter. Tables had been set up in the shade of the cottonwood trees, laden with Mrs. Finch's cooking and contributions from nearly every household in Promise Creek. Dorothea moved through the crowd in a happy daze, accepting congratulations, introducing herself to neighboring ranchers and their wives, watching Kade's face light up whenever their eyes met across the gathering. Eliza stayed close to her side for much of the afternoon, proudly introducing her as my new mother to anyone who would listen. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the celebration, Kade found Dorothea and led her away from the crowd, toward a quiet spot beneath a lone oak tree. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Incredibly," she answered honestly. "More than I ever thought possible," he kissed her softly. We should make our escape soon. The guests will understand." A blush rose to Dorothea's cheeks at the implication, but there was anticipation too, not fear. "Where will we go, with everyone here at the ranch?" "I've arranged a surprise," Kade said with a smile. "Do you trust me?" "With everything," she replied simply. They returned to the gathering long enough to cut the wedding cake and accept a final round of good wishes. Then, amid cheers and a shower of flower petals, they departed in Kade's buggy, now festooned with even more ribbons and a sign proclaiming "just married" attached to the back by some mischievous well-wisher. Instead of driving toward the house, however, Kade took them in the opposite direction, following a trail that led deeper into the ranch property. After about a mile, they came to a small clearing where a cabin stood, not a rough shelter, but a well-built structure with glass windows and a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly. "What is this place?" Dorothea asked, surprised. "It was the original homestead cabin," Kade explained as he helped her down from the buggy. "I built the main house later when the ranch began to prosper. I've had it fixed up these past weeks, a wedding present for you. I thought we might want some privacy for a few days." He lifted her into his arms before she could respond, carrying her across the threshold as she laughed in delight. Inside, the cabin was cozy and welcoming. A fire burned in the hearth, casting warm light over simple but comfortable furnishings. A table was set for two, with covered dishes keeping a meal warm. Fresh flowers brightened the room, and through an open door, Dorothea glimpsed a bedroom where the turned-down bed was scattered with rose petals. "Kade, it's perfect," she breathed as he set her gently on her feet. "Absolutely perfect." "Not quite," he said, drawing her into his arms. "Now it's perfect." His kiss was different from those they had shared before, deeper, more insistent, a promise of the night to come. Dorothea responded with a passion that surprised even her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing closer to his. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Dorothea Quinn," he said, using her new name for the first time. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much I love you too," she whispered. "And I'm going to hold you to that promise." Later, much later, as they lay entwined beneath the soft quilt, Dorothea's head resting on Kade's chest, he stroked her hair gently. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking about how wrong I was, about being too old for this, for love, for beginning again." His arms tightened around her. "Age is just a number, Dorothea. It's the heart that matters." "My heart is very happy," she said, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined it could be." "Good," he murmured, his voice growing sleepy. "Because we're just getting started, you and I, the best is yet to come." And in that moment, Dorothea believed him completely. The path that had led her to Promise Creek, to this man, to this new life, had been long and sometimes lonely. But now, in Kade's arms, she understood that the journey had been necessary, each step preparing her for the joy she now felt. She had thought herself too old to be wanted, too late for love. Kade had shown her how wrong she was. With him, she had found not just a second chance, but a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. Outside, the Montana night was filled with stars, each one a promise of the days and years to come, days they would face together, as husband and wife, partners in whatever life brought their way. And in the safe harbor of Kade's embrace, Dorothea finally allowed herself to believe that she had not missed her chance at happiness after all. She had simply been waiting for the right time, the right place, and most of all, the right man, the one who had waited for her too.